The lights in my house flickered for the third time that night, followed by an eerie hum from the walls. I checked the clock, 2:07 a.m. Something wasn't right. My electric bill had nearly doubled this month, yet I hadn't changed a single thing. No new appliances, no extra lights left on, nothing. I sat up in bed, my mind racing. Either my house was haunted by a ghost with an obsession for energy consumption, or someone was stealing my electricity. The second option seemed absurd. Who in their right mind would siphon off someone else's power in a quiet suburban neighborhood? And how? I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I had already spent an hour earlier in the evening flipping breakers and checking appliances, trying to figure out why my energy bill had skyrocketed. Now, as I sat there in the dim light of my bedroom, I decided I needed answers. I pulled on my hoodie, grabbed a flashlight, and made my way outside. The night was still, the air crisp. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Then I noticed a faint glow, coming from the side of my house, near my outdoor power outlet. As I crept closer, I spotted it. A thick black cable ran from my outlet, disappearing into the neatly trimmed hedges that divided my property from my neighbors. My heart pounded. I crouched down, followed the cable, and peered through the bushes. That's when I saw her. Karen, the self-righteous, rule-obsessed HOA president, standing in her driveway, smugly plugging the cable into her luxury electric car. I stared, mouth slightly open, trying to process what I was seeing. Karen, the woman who fined me $50 last year for having my trash cans visible from the street for more than 20 minutes, was stealing my electricity in the dead of night. And the worst part? She acted like she had every right to do it. She casually flipped through her phone as her expensive car greedily sucked up the power I was paying for. I wanted to storm over and call her out right then and there, but I knew how Karen worked. She had a way of twisting situations in her favor, hiding behind HOA policies and manufactured outrage. If I confronted her without proof, she'd gaslight me into oblivion. No, I needed a plan. The next morning, I knocked on her door. She answered with her usual tight-lipped smile, the one that barely masked the condescension lurking beneath. "Morning, Jake," she said sweetly. "Something I can do for you?" I forced a polite smile. "Yeah, actually. My electric bill has been through the roof lately, and I noticed a cable running from my outdoor outlet into your yard last night. Any chance you know anything about that?" Her expression didn't even flicker. "Oh, that? Yes, I borrowed a little electricity. It's not a big deal." I blinked. "You borrowed it?" She waved a hand dismissively. "Jake, as an HOA resident, you have a duty to contribute to the community. My car helps reduce carbon emissions, which benefits everyone. And while your outlet was just sitting there unused, I assumed you wouldn't mind." I stared at her, dumbfounded. She wasn't just stealing, she was justifying it like she was doing me a favor. "Karen, that's not how this works," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You can't just plug into my house without permission." She sighed dramatically as if I were the unreasonable one. "Jake, let's not be petty about this. If you want, I'll contribute a little extra to the community fund next month." Oh, so now she was bribing me with HOA money? Unbelievable. I clenched my jaw. "No. You need to unplug your car right now." She folded her arms, tilting her head like she was scolding a misbehaving child. "Are you sure you want to take that stance? I'd hate to have to start enforcing all the HOA regulations to the letter. I mean, just off the top of my head, I'm pretty sure your porch light is 2 lumens over the approved brightness level. That could be a finable offense." She smiled. She was threatening me. I exhaled slowly, resisting the urge to launch into a full-blown rant. I knew her type. She thrived on control, on making people feel powerless. But I wasn't about to let her walk all over me. I forced a chuckle. "All right, Karen. If that's how you want to play it." Her smile faltered just a little. I turned and walked away, already forming a plan in my head. If Karen wanted to play dirty, then I'd show her exactly how dirty I could get. That night, I installed a small security camera facing the outlet. It was disguised as a decorative rock, something subtle that Karen wouldn't notice. If she plugged in again, I'd have undeniable proof. But that wasn't all. I had something much better in mind. At exactly 1:58 a.m., I got the notification. Motion detected. I sat up in bed, grabbed my phone, and pulled up the camera feed. There she was, dressed in her usual silk robe, sneaking into my yard like some kind of eco-friendly bandit. She plugged in her car and started scrolling through her phone, oblivious to what was about to happen. I smirked and pressed a button on my own little invention, an old prank surge protector I had modified earlier that day. It wouldn't actually damage anything, but the moment her car started charging, it let out the most ungodly screeching noise imaginable, like a mix between a fire alarm and a dying robot. Karen jumped back so hard she tripped over her own feet, dropping her phone onto the pavement with a clatter. The car's emergency lights started flashing wildly, displaying warning messages across its sleek touchscreen. For a solid 5 seconds she just stood there, frozen, staring at her possessed vehicle. Then in a blind panic she yanked the cable out of my outlet, nearly ripping it from the wall, and bolted back inside her house like a raccoon caught in a garbage can. I laughed until I couldn't breathe. The next morning I made sure to take my sweet time watering my front lawn, just so I could watch her peek nervously through her blinds every few seconds. She looked like she hadn't slept a wink. And this was just the beginning. If Karen thought she could bully me into silence, she was about to find out exactly what happens when you mess with the wrong neighbor. Karen didn't come outside the entire day, which was unusual for someone who thrived on patrolling the neighborhood, clipboard in hand, ready to enforce the most trivial of HOA violations. I knew she was rattled. That was good, but it wasn't enough. A single sleepless night wasn't going to make up for months of her fining me for nonsense while secretly leeching off my electricity. She needed to learn that she couldn't just manipulate and threaten her way out of this. That afternoon I casually walked past her house and saw her car still parked in the driveway. She hadn't plugged it in since the incident, probably too scared to touch anything electrical. I smirked at the thought of her debating whether or not her car was cursed. But knowing Karen, she wasn't the type to back down completely. She'd regroup, find a way to justify her actions, and come back with an even bigger power move. That's why I needed to strike first. I spent the evening researching how she had managed to steal my electricity so effortlessly. At first I assumed she had simply used an extension cord, but after a closer look, I realized the truth was much worse. She had actually run an underground cable from my outdoor outlet to her property, disguising it as part of the HOA's landscaping enhancements. It was buried under a thin layer of mulch near the hedge line, blending in so well that I never would have noticed if I hadn't started looking for it. I felt my blood boil. This wasn't just a casual, opportunistic theft. She had planned this, going as far as to modify HOA property to make her crime easier. And she had done it knowing full well that she would fine any other resident for something as small as having their lawn gnome positioned too close to the sidewalk. The sheer audacity of it all made my next move clear. If Karen wanted to treat my electricity like her own personal charging station, I was going to give her exactly what she deserved. I spent the next day setting up my trap. First, I disconnected the underground cable from my outlet, making sure to leave it intact so Karen wouldn't immediately notice. Then I installed a fake outlet in its place. It looked identical to the real one but was completely non-functional. Meanwhile, I rerouted my actual electricity through a dummy surge protector, one that would trigger a loud, blaring siren the second it detected an unauthorized connection. The best part? I attached a small Bluetooth speaker near her garage, programmed to play a robotic voice announcement the moment she tried to steal power again. It would say in a cold, emotionless tone, "Unauthorized electrical access detected. System override engaged." I wanted her to think her high-end electric car was under attack. Then for the finishing touch, I placed a hidden camera in my yard, disguised as a simple garden decoration. This time I wanted to capture every second of her inevitable meltdown in full HD. That night I waited. Karen had gone a full 24 hours without charging her car, and I knew she wouldn't last much longer. By 2:12 a.m., my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I sat up, heart pounding with anticipation. Sure enough, there she was, dressed in her usual silk robe and slippers, creeping toward my yard like a burglar. She glanced around nervously before reaching for the outlet. But instead of plugging her car in immediately, she hesitated, probably still shaken from the last time. For a brief moment I thought she might back out. Maybe she had finally learned her lesson. Maybe she would turn around, walk away, and he plugged it in. Instantly the night erupted in chaos. The siren blared to life, wailing like a police raid, while my Bluetooth speaker activated with a perfectly timed robotic voice. "Unauthorized electrical access detected. System override engaged." Karen screamed. Not a little yelp, an actual full-bodied horror movie scream. Her car, which had immediately detected the surge protector's interference, began flashing emergency warnings on its massive dashboard screen. Bright red letters blinked repeatedly: system error. Power source compromised. Panicking, she tried to unplug the cord, but in her blind terror she yanked too hard, tripping over her own feet and crashing backward into the hedge. The siren kept wailing. The robotic voice repeated its warning. Karen scrambled to her feet, looking like a woman possessed. She grabbed her phone and frantically started tapping, probably trying to shut down the car remotely. It didn't work. The error message stayed on the screen, taunting her. She let out a strangled noise, like a mix between frustration and sheer, unfiltered fear, then bolted inside her house, slamming the door behind her. I had to shove my fist into my mouth to keep from bursting into laughter. It was, without a doubt, the greatest thing I had ever witnessed. But the best part? The entire event had been recorded from 3 different angles. I spent the next morning reviewing the footage, savoring every second. Karen's face when she thought her car was being hacked? Priceless. The way she tripped and flailed into the hedge? Pure comedy gold. But I wasn't just here for entertainment. I had evidence now. Undeniable proof that she had been stealing my electricity. By noon, I sent an email to the entire HOA board. Attached were video clips of Karen's late-night borrowing, along with a detailed breakdown of the underground wiring modification she had made to HOA property. I knew exactly how to word it so that it wasn't just a simple complaint. It was a legal liability nightmare. The response was immediate. Within an hour, the HOA Vice President replied with a formal statement. This matter will be investigated immediately. That was HOA language for, we are terrified of a lawsuit and need to do damage control. Sure enough, by the evening, I saw 2 HOA board members standing in Karen's driveway, arms crossed, demanding an explanation. She tried to argue, tried to spin the situation, but the moment they showed her the footage I had sent, she deflated like a punctured balloon. Her hands waved frantically, her voice rising in pitch as she tried to weasel her way out of it. But for the first time ever, no one was buying her nonsense. I watched from my porch as they handed her a notice of violation, one with a hefty fine attached. She turned redder than a stop sign. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, but no words came out. And just when I thought it couldn't get any better, the HOA President, a man who had been under Karen's thumb for years, spoke up loud enough for the whole street to hear. Karen, as of today, will also be conducting a vote on new HOA leadership. Her face drained of color. I leaned back in my chair, sipping my coffee, watching the slow-motion destruction of my self-righteous neighbor. And the best part? The lesson wasn't over yet. Karen had always carried herself like a queen ruling over her small suburban kingdom, but today she looked like a dethroned monarch clinging desperately to her crumbling empire. I watched from my porch as she paced back and forth in her driveway, her phone pressed tightly to her ear. From the frantic way she gestured, I could only assume she was making some last-ditch effort to salvage her reputation. Maybe she was calling the HOA board members, trying to convince them that she was the real victim here. Maybe she was calling a lawyer, though I doubted even the best attorney could spin stealing electricity into something legally justifiable. Either way, she was unraveling and I was thoroughly enjoying the show. By mid-afternoon, the neighborhood was buzzing with gossip. Word had spread fast about Karen's late-night electrical heist, and even the residents who normally stayed out of HOA politics were suddenly very interested in what would happen next. A few of my neighbors even stopped by to congratulate me, subtly implying that they had been waiting for someone to take Karen down for years. Apparently, I had become the local hero overnight. The real fun started when the official HOA violation notice was posted on Karen's front door. It was printed in bold letters, stating that she had been fined for unauthorized electrical modifications and improper use of a neighbor's power source. The fine was hefty, several $1,000s in fact. I had to hand it to the HOA board. They were finally showing some backbone. But even that wasn't the final blow. The biggest hit came later that evening when the HOA president sent out an official email to all residents, announcing an emergency meeting to discuss leadership restructuring. That was HOA language for "we're kicking Karen out." Karen must have seen the email the second it went out because within minutes she stormed down the sidewalk straight toward my house. I barely had time to set my drink down before she was banging on my door. I opened it slowly, leaning against the frame with a deliberately casual expression. Karen, to what do I owe the pleasure? Her face was a mixture of rage and desperation, like she couldn't decide whether to scream at me or beg for mercy. You, she seethed. You set me up. I raised an eyebrow. You mean I caught you stealing my electricity on video? She let out a sharp breath through her nose, her hands shaking as she clenched them into fists. You don't understand what you've done. I am this HOA. Do you think the neighborhood can function without me? I blinked. You fined Mrs. Thompson $200 for planting tulips that were the wrong shade of yellow. I think we'll manage. Her jaw clenched so tightly I thought she might crack a tooth. Fine. You want to play dirty? Let's play dirty. I still have friends on the board. I can still fight this. I shrugged. Go ahead. But I don't think they're going to be too eager to defend someone who got caught committing actual theft. For the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed her face. She had spent years using HOA rules as a weapon, but now the very thing she had wielded against others was turning against her. And she knew it. Without another word, she spun on her heel and marched away, slamming her own door behind her. That night, the HOA meeting was held in the community clubhouse, and nearly every resident showed up. Normally, these meetings were a dull, bureaucratic nightmare that no one wanted to attend, but tonight people had come prepared. Some brought copies of the email I had sent. Others had their own horror stories about Karen's ridiculous fines and power trips. A few even brought printouts of the security footage I had taken, passing them around like evidence in a courtroom. Karen sat stiffly in the front row, her arms crossed so tightly it looked like she was trying to hold herself together. The moment the meeting started, the accusations began pouring in. Karen fined me for having a bird feeder that attracted unauthorized wildlife. She wrote me up because my kid's bike was on the front porch for 5 minutes. She told me my driveway looked untidy, and tried to fine me for it. She increased our HOA dues and never explained why. The list went on and on. Every complaint, every ridiculous fine, every abuse of power. Tonight, it all came back to haunt her. And the best part? She couldn't do anything about it. She sat there, her face pale, her lips pressed into a thin line, watching as her entire reign crumbled before her eyes. When the vote was finally called, it wasn't even close. The board members, desperate to distance themselves from the scandal, wasted no time announcing that Karen was being removed as HOA President effective immediately. The room erupted into cheers. A few people actually clapped. Karen, for the first time in her life, had no control. She stood up so suddenly that her chair scraped against the floor, the sound cutting through the noise like a knife. Her hands trembled at her sides. You're all making a mistake, she said, her voice shaking. This neighborhood needs structure. It needs rules. Someone near the back muttered, not your rules. She turned on her heel and stormed out of the clubhouse, slamming the door behind her. And just like that, she was gone. The celebration lasted well into the night. People were already discussing who should take over as the new HOA president. Names were thrown around, but eventually someone pointed at me. Jake should do it. I almost choked on my drink. Me. You're the only one who actually stood up to Karen, another person said. You got her out. That's exactly the kind of leadership we need. I tried to protest, but it was too late. The votes were being cast, and before I knew it, the decision was official. I was now the new HOA president. The irony wasn't lost on me. A week ago I wanted nothing to do with the HOA. Now I was running it. But I had to admit, if I was in charge, things were going to be very different. The next morning, my first act as HOA president was simple. I gathered all of Karen's ridiculous rule sheets, the ones she had personally typed up and laminated, and tossed them straight into the garbage. Then I sent out an email to all the residents. Effective immediately, no more absurd fines. No more nitpicky rules. And definitely no more stealing electricity. Welcome to the new HOA. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt lighter. No more Karen lurking around with her clipboard. No more ridiculous fines. No more power trips. As I sat back on my porch sipping my coffee, I saw Karen peeking out from her window across the street. She looked at me, seething, and I simply smiled and raised my mug in a toast. She had ruled this neighborhood with an iron fist for years. But now the power shift was complete. And as for her car? Well, let's just say she never dared to plug it into my house again.